The biggest psycho-emotional trend within the chronic illness patient population is not, contrary to popular belief, the lazy butt, the couch potato, the mooch, or the self-indulgent weirdo. No, it's the people pleaser who is possessed by an unconscious core belief that in order to survive, they must overgive and underreceive. Now, make no mistake, this is a defensive adaptation unconsciously developed as a result of childhood trauma, which, if not healed in adulthood, will, in a large majority of cases, lead to chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, and an ongoing series of agonizing entanglements with narcissistic friends and partners. But here's why this is so important. Let me see if I can embody the kind of gravitas this following statement requires. You people pleasers and overgivers might just be the best of us, and the only way for us to get out of this global mess we're in, but only on condition you heal. Look, you small town saints are kind, open-hearted, always ready to give the shirt off your back, which is why you all walk around shirtless. You're always there when we need you, go above and beyond, and think nothing of asking for anything in return, which is precisely part of the problem. That's right. You hold boundaries like a sieve. You have such allergies to saying no that you carry around EpiPens just in case one accidentally slips out. Let's also remember that you absolute sweethearts have completely filled our healing professions. Are most of our nurses, naturopaths, social workers, counselors, caregivers, school teachers. You work in NGOs, charitable foundations, and of course, nonprofits, the organizational equivalent of the pleaser pattern. You overwork, undersleep, regularly skip lunch, or just give it to the first person you see on the street and then wrap yourselves in a bubble of white light and drink air. You sacrifice yourself for righteous causes and often spend your entire life helping the least among us, even to the detriment of your own health. Perhaps most frustratingly, you just refuse to accept compliments, which really pisses me off because in spite of all this, you're beautiful. And when I tell you so, and you say, nah, this old thing, I just threw it on, you're engaging in precisely the transferential reenactment of the original trauma that started this whole thing in the first place. And I really want to help you stop it so you can actually save the world and not get so taken advantage of in the process. So if you're a pleaser, overgiver, underreceiver, this one's for you. And yet, because I know full well that you will absolutely not be willing to heal for yourself, I'm just going to ask you to do it for the rest of us. The rest of us who know that there's just nothing better in life than to be in relationship with a recovered, healed overgiver, because then you really are the best. Kindness without the weakness, open-hearted with boundaries, generosity and reciprocity, love and care that's no longer driven by guilt. What could be better? Okay. Should we do this? Okay. First things first. Your unconscious program of people pleasing was likely created in childhood as an entirely appropriate psycho-emotional defensive adaptation to an emotionally under-resourced family system. Now, while there are any number of family configurations that can give rise to this, the original prototype, and probably most common, involves an emotionally absent father or literally absent father. Love you, Dad. And a mother who was attracted to him because she also had an absent father, and as a result, developed within her a kind of void of need, like a black hole of distress that the child is then unconsciously conscripted into supporting. Now, children born into this system, and specifically only children, eldest children, and often the last of several children, will immediately begin to scaffold their mother's void of need under the unconscious assessment that if mom doesn't have enough support, she will fall. And if she falls, then I'll fall. So it's also important to remember that in the unconscious mind of the child, the overgiver adaptation is really a response to nothing less than an existential threat. As a result, the child will develop in two very specific ways. Firstly, they will begin to unconsciously marginalize their own needs in order to minimize the burdens placed on mom, while simultaneously excessively developing their ability to give and support and attune to her, even beyond their own capacity, and ultimately at the cost of their own well being. Characteristics that we also need to remember are like champagne and caviar to the narcissist later in life. Oh, yeah. Chronically neglecting your own needs, overindulging the egocentric entitlement of the other, it's so hot to the taker. Now, as a result, the fate of the overgiver is to become so pathologically selfless that they actually end up, in some ways, completely losing themselves in service to the other. And the only way this can ever take place, the only way for the child to actually endure the emotional pain of giving past their limits and of not receiving in ways that are entirely appropriate in healthy, equitable relationships, is that they have to literally dissociate from their somatic ability to gauge that relational equity. And this is psychic fragmentation. It's trauma. And yet we also have to acknowledge that at the time, it was an entirely appropriate but temporary scaffold to mom and the family system under difficult circumstances. The key word here is temporary. This is not a sustainable long-term strategy. To continue this into adulthood, like any trauma-based adaptation, is like keeping your training wheels on through grad school or your Christmas decorations up through summer. It's just not right. And eventually, if you don't stop it, someone's going to get hurt. So the first stage of healing is to simply become conscious of the fact that all this is happening, which sounds so much easier than it actually is. Because newsflash, trauma is unconscious and also possesses our most powerful psycho-emotional defense mechanisms to being made conscious, let alone changed. Even more importantly, when we begin to approach someone's trauma in their unconscious, they will regress to the age that the trauma took place in. And in so doing, suddenly see everything we're talking about dogmatically, oversimplistically, in black and white terms without nuance or granularity. So for a time, they'll likely defend the pattern, understandably, with any number of rationalizations for why it was appropriate to overgive in this situation, and that situation, and all the situations. So also bear in mind that the pattern itself will have entangled them within certain relationships over the course of years that they will now likely be neck deep in and that will require sensitivity and time to disentangle from. So be patient and resist the temptation to argue, sigh loudly, or accuse them of being crazy. Simply try to remember that any premature attempts to help will be perceived by the exiled, traumatized inner child that they are fused with, as if you're trying to tell them to stop helping mom, to let her fall, and to accept the possibility of falling too. Even if on the surface, you're simply suggesting that maybe it's not the best idea to help that narcissistic friend of theirs move everything out of their storage container single-handedly with that bad back of theirs, having just gotten over the flu and on their first day off in 5 years. Classic overgiver. Just be patient. Keep tracking the pattern until they begin to see how ubiquitous it actually is in their life. Once they become intellectually conscious of it, then you can begin to address the wound one level deeper at the emotional level, which will involve coming into direct contact with the emotional driver of the pattern, guilt. Now, while guilt can be a wonderfully appropriate alarm system from our conscience to us when we have violated our own standards and need to make amends, the guilt that fuels the overgiver pattern is a liar and not to be trusted. It's simply taking that painful childhood experience, that trauma, of feeling that there was just not enough to go around, and introjecting the responsibility of that onto the self, which then gives rise to guilt, and which is then branded onto the amygdala, which in turn massively overcompensates with regards to taking responsibility for the rest of life. To put it simply, it's just an old program trying desperately to heal the past by overcorrecting in the present, by making you feel as if you are never doing enough, and also forbidding you from receiving because unconsciously you believe that to do so would mean that mom or the rest of the family system would have to go without. even if by this time, mom is miles away or has reincarnated into a dolphin. And you're actually just thinking, maybe I should take that day off and not help that taker friend move. Pro tip: why does the child come to this conclusion in the moment of trauma and not another? Well, a psychological rule of thumb is that children will often introject responsibility, while adults will project responsibility. Children will say, it's my fault, and adults will say, it's your fault, both of which are almost always oversimplistic conclusions. But perhaps more importantly, the reason the child will seek to accept responsibility for something that they could not have prevented, like the pain of an under-resourced mother or family system, or in many cases that I've encountered, the death of a loved one, is because to the developing psyche, it's actually far more palatable to believe that if only I'd been smarter or stronger, I could have saved them, rather than we live in a cruel, chaotic world and are sadly often completely helpless to the tragedies that take place within it. To the young, developing psyche, that's a terrifying existential truth that they are usually not ready to accept. And so instead, they will unconsciously choose the more empowering belief, even if it's not true, that it was my fault and that I could have saved the day if only I'd been a little stronger and a little smarter. Because then if the trauma happens again in the future, I know I can do something about it, and I'm not simply floating around helplessly in an unpredictable world. Wrapped inside that emotion of guilt, true to the very structure of trauma, is the core limiting belief at the center of the overgiver pattern, which is usually going something like this. If I don't bleed myself dry, I won't be loved, I won't be worthy, and I will risk being abandoned, exiled, and ultimately left for dead. When we begin to heal, we have to uncover this limiting belief and scrutinize the truth of it in every relational situation, which we will usually find no longer exists. Healing begins and ends with this reorientation to our relationship to guilt and to that core limiting belief wrapped inside of it. This is the primary crossroads at the very heart of supporting the overgiver to heal. And it involves a paradigm shift from, here we go, this is the important part, a paradigm shift from relating to the guilt like an adult fused with a traumatized child to relating to it like a parental caretaker who is separate from the traumatized child and slowly and supportively guiding them to rebalance all relational ties and usher them into their most healthy expressions. In the first paradigm, the trauma is dictating our behavior. It's controlling us. In the second, we are gently wrestling back control of our behavior from the grubby little digits of that little child. Even though while we are doing this, we will be periodically re-triggered and refused back into them, back into the guilt, back into the primitive response, until one day, after much practice, you're just not. And let's be incredibly clear here. While doing all of this, the guilt is going to sound like bad elevator music that's just constantly running. And it's going to try to convince you that only by giving everything of yourself will you absolve that guilt and ultimately succeed, which once again is a massive big fat lie. A lie because no matter how hard the overgiver works, it will never absolve the guilt and never heal the trauma. Because overworking and perpetuating a defensive adaptation that originated in childhood trauma is not how trauma is healed. It's how it's perpetuated. Healing, downregulating the omnipresence of this guilt and rewiring the core belief wrapped within it, requires you to ultimately come back to yourself. You literally have to begin pulling back your energetic overgiver tentacles that you have pathologically exiled from yourself for the purpose of over-attuning to the other and bring them home. This is one of the least talked about aspects of the overgiver pattern, I find. The fact that part of the traumatic defensive adaptation is that it wrenches your awareness out of yourself and clamps it onto the other, whoever the other is. I've watched so many overgivers over the years struggle with this, with re-anchoring their awareness in themselves, as if trying to keep a beach ball under the water. Because lest we forget, that original wound required the child to unconsciously exile their awareness from that felt sense of relational give and take. and overly focus on the needs of the other, and in so doing, endorsing that original imbalance. That's why we have to come back to the body and relearn what that healthy give and take actually feels like from within. And how we do this is to begin simply slowing down and becoming somatically present in those relational moments in which our awareness was previously absent. Because it's only from that place that we can begin to re-notice and re-feel the exact moments when we self-abandon, exceed our own boundaries, refuse what is rightfully ours, and correct it. This is the moment that we begin to feel our way back into what is a natural, enjoyable, psychosomatic homeostasis that takes place when we are in generative relationship with others, as opposed to how unpleasant a lopsided relationship actually feels, in which you're constantly depleting yourself while enabling the entitlement of the other, contributing, in fact, to the whole inequality of the world, as if being an ambassador for the least among us on the surface, while unconsciously broadcasting to everyone around you that you would like the abuse, overreach, and inequity to continue because, well, you yourself are accepting it. The real wound of the pleaser is that they can't feel the energetics of relational give and take, because that was precisely the part of their somatic system that they had to exile and disassociate from in order to scaffold mom, dad, or whoever in the first place. Here's another way of thinking about it. A healthy psyche is shaped like a mandala and should be somewhat symmetrical, uniform. But in the case of the overgiver, is actually a little misshapen in that the masculine side that is designed, among other things, to give has been overly developed, distended, inflated, while the corresponding feminine side that is, among other things, designed to receive has been neglected, is shrunken, withered, developmentally immature, and in extreme cases, completely shut off. Why this can be useful to visualize is because readjusting those aspects of the psyche cannot simply be done solely with energy medicine or shamanic or psychedelic journeys if they're not also paired with actual boots on the ground behavioral modifications that have to include curbing that excessive giving and opening up to receiving. I've sometimes used the analogy of the chiropractor who gives you a great adjustment because your back is out due to sitting on that cheap Office Depot chair. But if every time you go back after the adjustment to the chair, you're never going to heal. You have to be willing to make these real world relational changes, which start with actually embodying another aspect of the healthy masculine, holding boundaries, so that when the child is about to overgive, you stop them. And then embody the healthy feminine, if and when they're being offered something they deserve, and they reflexively refuse it. And you, in turn, support them to accept. That being said, once you really begin to do all of this, you're sadly going to find that a lot of people in your orbit are simply not open to accommodating those healthy changes. And this is what I call the tragic and inevitable consequences of healing the overgiver. I've rarely seen someone recover from chronic illness by simply chasing their symptoms or addressing them purely at the physiological level. For real, lasting healing to take place, if it is to take place at all, it usually has to involve an authentic transformation and corresponding life reorientation. Or else, most interventions risk providing temporary relief that continue the never-ending cycle of remission and relapse. In the case of the overgiver, a major aspect of this transformation involves letting go of all those toxic relationships that were built on the overgiver under-receiver foundation. That being said, when the overgiver begins to finally relearn the appropriate balance of give and take in relationships, and they begin to make those adjustments and requests to rebalance them, sadly, they will find that a large number of people in their lives will be simply unwilling to go along with those changes and just drift away. Jerks. Which, nonetheless, raises an important question because so many will take that experience and blame themselves instead of accepting the deeper truth of the situation, which is that overgivers naturally pair with their complementary opposite, as we've said, the taker or the narcissist, as an unconscious way of mirroring what each needs to learn. The overgiver to be more selfish and the narcissist to be more selfless. And so when the overgiver finally begins to correct this pattern, those individuals will often refuse because they never wanted a healthy, balanced relationship in the first place. And now that you want one, it doesn't serve them. And so they just have to find another overgiver slightly earlier on in their journey to meet their needs all over again. It's terrible. I know. Also, what can make this breakdown in the relationship so difficult that we have to remember for the overgiver to endure is because those kinds of breakdowns in relationship trigger that old wound with mom, as if they are literally reenacting the ultimate nightmare of not overgiving, of holding a boundary, and in so doing, letting her down and having the entire relationship collapse, being abandoned, exiled, left for dead. All of that's running through on the unconscious level of the mind. Sadly, this is often what we have to go through to heal. We have to break with the takers. Where it becomes more complicated is with takers or narcissists upon whom we are dependent, which requires an even more skillful, strategic, and tactical extraction over time. But from what I've seen, if you undergo this healing transformation, you can probably expect between 10 and 20% of the around you to accept it and go along with you, with the rest being a little less willing. So just be aware of that. Now, before we close, I would like to mention how the pattern can also be exacerbated when taking place within a Judeo-Christian religious context. I really hope I don't offend anyone here, but I think it's really bears mentioning. Christians, God bless them, I love you, I've worked with many who I respect deeply over the years, will understandably often struggle with an entirely additional burden of guilt brought about by the notion of original sin and the fact that Jesus died for them, which is a debt that they know full well they will never be able to adequately repay, and which, of course, echoes the mom situation somewhat, all of which understandably can magnify the guilt and consequently the overgiving pattern, even tragically into variations on the martyr archetype, especially, I would say, with caregivers. So please be aware of that. Additionally, survivor guilt, whether Jewish, Palestinian, Ukrainian, or Russian, or any other for that matter, can also amplify the intensity of the overgiver pattern, because how on earth am I supposed to moderate my giving according to my means, as well as be open to receiving as part of healthy relational give and take when so many of those I love have suffered so much and are still suffering to this day? Now, the approach to healing here doesn't really change for any of these variations, but it can make it a little more complicated, a little more intractable, and take longer. Naturally, because these individuals have to come to peace with the impossible, even distasteful fact that their suffering will not help to alleviate anyone else's. Okay, here's the summary. Number one, identify the pattern intellectually. This is the psychic scaffolding that is absolutely necessary for the remodel to take place safely. If we don't understand the journey, we just won't be able to take it. Two, transition from being controlled by the child within you, the guilt and the limiting belief, to being the good parent who has a responsibility to guide that child towards a more balanced give and take. Three, accept that many of your relationships, sadly, will come to an end because they were built on those faulty foundations of that over-giving wound. Please trust that when you get the wrong people off the bus, you create a vacuum in your life for the right people to get on. Pro tip: when we let go of a taker in our lives, especially a partner who's a taker, and I've seen this so many times, I just have to give it to you, the universe is going to give you two more that look even better, that tempt you even more to regress back into the old pattern. So just to see if you've learned your lesson. So left swipe on those, and that's the best way to avoid a re-entanglement and to realign and invite the new paradigm. Finally, take heart in the fact that cleaning up your relational field is one of the most essential and overlooked elements of healing. You not only deserve to be in a web of individuals who support and care for you, you need it. You need it to heal, you need it to feel healthy. And if your given family can't do that for you, can't be that for you, then for better or for worse, it's your hero's journey to find a chosen family who can. And they are out there, I promise. So don't give up. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks for listening, and peace in.